State may call us next witness.
State will call Paul Bush.
Sir, if you just come forward, appear to be sworn in. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I see right here.
Please state your full name.
My name is Paul J. Bush, spelled B-U-S-H.
What is your occupation?
My occupation is a criminalist supervisor for the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Criminalistics Laboratory.
And please describe what your duties are.
My duties at the DCI Crime Lab involve the supervision of the DNA unit in our crime laboratory, and this oversees, again, all aspects of DNA analysis in the laboratory.
What is your training and educational background?
My formal education consists of a Bachelor of Science degree with double majors in chemistry and biology from Morningside College in Sioux City. With that, I possess a secondary education, teaching certificate, and coaching endorsements. I also possess a Master of Arts degree from Drake University in biology. That master's degree at the time was a thesis program in the area of forensic DNA analysis.
You've used the term DNA analysis, and there's going to be a witness later in the week who's going to testify in more detail in this case, I think, about DNA analysis. But can you give us just kind of a general description of what is DNA and what does the laboratory do?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the what I call the molecular building blocks that are in the nucleus of everyone's cell. Well, I guess whether you're human, animal, or plant, every living organism has that DNA, and it's the blueprint that makes you the individual that you are.
Now, what does the lab do?
The laboratory, as far as my section is concerned, if we're talking specifically about the DNA unit, looks at evidence in criminal cases. From our standpoint, we're going to look to identify biological fluids, first of all, such as seminal fluid, saliva, blood, urine, any of those biological fluids that would come from your body. And once we would hopefully identify those biological fluids, would attempt to do DNA analysis on them to associate then those biological fluids to a specific individual.
So am I correct that you would have a sample or an item that would be sent by law enforcement to the lab, and then a known sample from an individual, and then make a comparison of those, the DNA analysis, to see if there's a match?
That is correct. Generally what we would do is develop a DNA profile from a forensic sample, such as a blood stain at the scene of a burglary, develop that DNA profile, and then compare that DNA profile to possible known specimens that would be submitted to us for comparison. And that could be a known DNA sample from a victim, known DNA from a suspect, and again, see if we can match those profiles together by comparison.
And that's for all every law enforcement agency in the state of Iowa?
That is correct. We do work for all law enforcement agencies, whether it be at the local PD, the sheriffs, any state law enforcement agency, or even federal agencies. We do work for all of those agencies.
Let's talk about 1990. First of all, what would have your occupation been in 1990, specifically September of 1990?
In September of 1990, I was a criminalist at the DCI Crime Laboratory, working in what was called the microanalysis and trace evidence section of the laboratory, which is really the precursor of DNA. We just weren't doing DNA at the time, so we were not called the DNA section.
Was the lab doing DNA analysis at all in 1990?
In 1990, our laboratory was not doing any DNA analysis. I was doing some research with my thesis program at the time, but our laboratory per se was not doing DNA testing.
And in the history of law enforcement using DNA commonly in their investigations, in 1990, where were we at?
In 1990, we were basically, and within the country, looking at one type of DNA analysis that was just coming online really in the United States at the time. Again, our laboratory was not capable of doing that testing. There was a lot of what I would say research and development at the time, and what I would say forensic crime labs throughout the country were just beginning to come online with one type of DNA analysis at that time.
Would it be correct to say that DNA analysis was kind of in its infancy in 1990?
Yes.
As a criminalist in 1990, what types of work did you do then?
Back in 1990, we would have been doing serological analysis, which again would be an attempt to identify biological fluids, such as blood, seminal fluid, saliva, and urine. Also, from that, once we would identify a biological fluid, we would attempt to do what was called conventional serological typing in an attempt to differentiate individuals based on, for example, their ABO blood type. And if I could give a little example, most of you hopefully may know about your ABO blood type. You can be a group A, group B, group O, or group AB. And that's what we would be attempting to do is attempt to determine your ABO blood type from either your blood, but also from other biological fluids such as urine, saliva, or semen.
Would you like water?
Yes, please, sorry.
I believe you used the term seminal fluid.
Yes.
What is that?
Seminal fluid is the liquid portion that comes from the testicles or testes of humans or living organisms that is involved in the fertilization of eggs to create human beings.
Now, in September of 1995, did the DCI laboratory receive some items from the Davenport Police Department for analysis?
Excuse me, did you say September 95 or September 1990?
I meant to say 1990, so in September of 1990.
In September of 1990, yes, we did receive evidence from the Davenport Police Department.
How was that evidence received in a general sense?
Evidence from any law enforcement agency around the state of Iowa. If forensic evidence testing is required, it is submitted to our laboratory on what's known as an evidence receipt form. And on that form, the submitting agency would list out the items of evidence that they are submitting to us, what requests they want from them, and then who the submitting agency is and their name and address.
And I believe you did testify you did receive some items from the Davenport Police Department regarding a request for analysis.
Yes.
And did you have a part in some of that analysis?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 120 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
State's Exhibit 120 is a copy of a laboratory report that I drafted on September 24th of 1990.
That, am I correct that State's, well, let me ask you this. Is State's Exhibit 120 a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes, it is.
This time I move to admit State's Exhibit 120.
Any objection?
No objection.
Exhibit 120 is admitted.
Mr. Bush, then starting on page 2 of State's Exhibit 120, what is that page?
Page 2 of State's Exhibit 120 is a copy of the evidence receipt form that identifies one item of evidence that was submitted in reference to this case back on September 19th of 1990.
And what was that item received?
That item received was listed as one Iowa sexual assault kit containing samples recovered from Jennifer Ann Lewis.
What is if you know, a sexual assault kit?
A sexual assault kit is a kit that is actually designed and developed by the Iowa DCI Crime Laboratory for the collection of physical evidence in sexual assault cases. We have determined what items that would be pertinent in collecting from a victim of sexual assault and have created a kit for that purpose. And what we've tried to do is standardize the items that are collected in a sexual assault from a victim, typically at a hospital after an alleged sexual assault.
And are those also used at autopsies?
Yes, they are. They can also be collected from autopsies or dead individuals also.
And the DCI supplies the hospitals and the forensic labs with a kit so that they're all trained in using the same things to get samples.
Yes, that's correct.
And you received one of those regarding the Jennifer Lewis murders.
Yes.
And you then were involved in examining that kit.
Yes.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 105. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 105?
Yes, I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 105?
State's Exhibit 105 is the sexual assault kit that was listed on that evidence receipt form, which I just talked about, listed as having originated from Jennifer Ann Lewis.
I believe you testified with your standardized kits. What's inside it?
In that kit, we would typically have an envelope for what is known as debris or any materials that could be on the surface of the body of that sexual assault victim, a pubic combings envelope for combing the pubic area of the victim in case there could be foreign pubic hairs or foreign materials from the suspect, a known pulled pubic hair envelope that would we would actually pluck some of the pulled pubic hairs or pluck pubic hairs from the victim for what we would consider a known standard for comparison against possibly hairs that would be recovered from the pubic combings. There's also a vaginal swabs envelope where we would collect swabbings from the vaginal vault area. Also vaginal smears, which is basically we take the vaginal swabs once they're collected from the vaginal vault and swab basically 2 glass slides to create what we call smears, and from that we would typically be looking for sperm. Also present is an envelope for oral swabs. In case there was an oral assault, we would again be collecting swabs from the oral cavity of that victim. Also, there are rectal swabs that are collected from the rectum or anus area of the victim in case there was a rectal assault. We also collect a pulled head hair sample, approximately a dozen head hairs from the head of the victim used as a known standard in comparison to other hairs that could be maybe at the crime scene. Finally, we also collect a known blood sample from that individual to determine that person's ABO type and secretor status, and then also could have a known saliva sample again to determine that individual's secretor status.
I believe you testified you did examine those items in State's Exhibit 105.
Yes.
This time I move to admit State's 105.
Yes. Exhibit 105 is submitted.
And the state's Exhibit 120 disclose the results of your examination of the sexual assault kit?
Yes.
What were the results of that examination?
The results of that examination are as follows. The sexual assault kit of Jennifer Ann Lewis was analyzed. The known blood of Jennifer Ann Lewis showed her belong to ABO Group B and to be what's called a non-secretor. No seminal fluid was detected on the vaginal, oral, or rectal swabs and smears. Pulled head hairs were noted but were not mounted.
One of the items that is typical in a sexual assault kit is pubic hairs. Was that done in the case of Jennifer Lewis?
In this case, there were no pubic combings collected. Again, I was informed that Jennifer Ann Lewis, I believe, was approximately 9 years old. So I was assuming since she was 9, she was probably prepubescent and had not, developed any pubic hairs yet.
The items, what was, so this is before DNA analysis. What is it that you're looking for then in your analysis?
In my analysis, I was attempting to determine what's called secretor status. Approximately 80% of the general population secrete their ABO blood group substances in their biological fluids. So semen, urine, saliva, perspiration, any body fluid that you excrete or secrete. If you are a secretor, we could determine your ABO blood type from your biological fluids coming out of your body. In this case, Jennifer Ann Lewis was a non-secretor, so she fell into that 20% of the population, and she did not secrete her ABO blood types in her biological fluids.
And am I correct in your examination that you're also looking for any foreign evidence?
Correct. So typically in a sexual assault kit, again back in 1990, I would have been looking for the presence of seminal fluid or possibly saliva. If that foreign biological fluid was present, I would then attempt to determine the ABO secretor blood type from that, say, seminal fluid or saliva that could be, say, on the vaginal swabs or on the rectal swabs, and would attempt to determine the ABO blood type of the assailant.
Am I correct then that, in fact, no seminal fluid was detected on the vaginal, oral, or rectal swabs and smears?
That is correct.
So there really was nothing left on Jennifer to examine to see if it was belonged to somebody.
From the biological fluid standpoint, I found nothing in the sexual assault kit of Jennifer Ann Lewis to associate to any individual.
And would that same thing be true even with DNA analysis today? There's nothing to compare it to. There's no comparison to be made.
Again, if we cannot identify any foreign biological fluids, again, such as seminal fluid, saliva, or any of those, then DNA would not do you any good either. You have to have that foreign biological fluid there in an attempt, whether we're doing secretor status or we're doing DNA, you need a foreign material there to test.
Are there ways to clean or destroy foreign biological substances?
Yes.
And what are some of those ways?
So obviously washing, such as detergents. So say we have blood on a shirt, and obviously I think this is common sense, wash it in a wash machine with detergent or soap, you're going to wash out that blood. Whether you're washing out these ABO blood group substances or DNA, you can wash that out. Different detergents or bleach, for example, will destroy DNA and biological fluids. Heat can destroy biological fluids also, so a number of different ways you can destroy biological fluids. Just exposure to the elements, for example, rain, sunlight, insect activity. If, say, there's a body or a piece of biological evidence that's sitting outside in Iowa in July, it's not going to last very long. And my best example of that would be if you set, say, a half a pound of hamburger out in your front yard or something, it's not going to be there, you know, are you going to want to look at it, say, a week later or something? It's either animals or plants, or not plants, but animals or insects are going to basically, you know, consume that evidence.
So it can be destroyed or disappear fairly easily.
And again, depending upon the circumstances, it can.
Do you have some information concerning the condition of Jennifer Lewis's body?
Yes.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 7. And State's Exhibit 14. After looking at those pictures, and based on your training and experience, do you have an opinion as to what effect that type of burning in Jennifer's vaginal and rectal area could have on any type of biological substance?
Again, based on the information that I had back at that time, again, I was informed that Jennifer Lewis's body had been burnt, possibly an accelerant used, and again, with that type of burning, you would expect very high temperatures. And when you have very high temperatures, such as from flames or burning, you would expect degradation or damage to DNA or any biological fluids. Typically, you would expect to see damage at about 60 degrees centigrade, or I think that would convert to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to start to have damage to the biological tissue or fluids that would be present.
So it would not be surprising that there was no seminal fluid or biological substance left in Jennifer after she was burned to that extent.
What I would say is if there was seminal fluid there, high heat from burning, such as a fire, would or could damage that biological fluid.
Are there other reasons why there might not be biological fluid present?
The other reason is maybe there was no seminal fluid present to begin with. Number two, maybe the individual, if there was a sexual assault, was vasectomized, so we did not see any sperm or any of those components. So just a multitude of reasons why, you know, I do not find or did not find seminal fluid on these samples.
Were you requested to examine some other items in relation to this investigation?
Yes.
I want to hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 127 for purposes of identification. And ask if you recognize State's Exhibit 127.
Yes, I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 127?
State's Exhibit 127 is a copy of a report that I drafted on November 21st of 1990 in relation to this case. It also contains the evidence receipt forms concerning the evidence that I analyzed in this case.
Is State's Exhibit 127 a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
Someone move to admit State's Exhibit 127. No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 127 is admitted.
So State's Exhibit 127 is the same format as 120. It's kind of three parts. A receipt for the items received from Davenport Police Department, then a description of the exhibits from the lab. And in fact, the lab gives them their own designation, item designation, is that correct?
That's correct. Once items of evidence come into our laboratory, we give them a unique designation so we can keep track of them in our laboratory so we know a unique number different than, say, the Davenport police number.
And then the final part, or top part, would be the report of your examination of those exhibits.
Yes, that's correct.
And there's numerous items listed in that report, is that correct?
Yes.
And I want to just address a few of them. The results are all in the report. On the front page, for instance, the items B, C, and D, what was your finding regarding those items?
As far as those items B, C, and D, which is our laboratory exhibit numbers or designations, nothing of apparent interest was noted on these items B, C, and D.
State's Exhibit 78, is that one of the items that you examined?
Yes, it is.
And what is that item?
State's Exhibit 78 would have been my designation. Item C, which was a pair of white sandals listed as having originated from Jennifer Lewis.
How do you know that those are the items that you would have examined?
Within this plastic bag, there is a paper sack, which is what I had when I looked at it, and it bears my initials from when I examined it, and then also has the unique laboratory case number and exhibit designation number.
State's Exhibit 80. Recognize the State's Exhibit 80 is.
Yes, I do recognize State's Exhibit 80.
And what is State's Exhibit 80?
State's Exhibit 80 is a listed as a paint can containing light-colored cloth from Lewis, smelling like gasoline.
Mr. Walton, you didn't ask to admit 78. Did you want to do that?
I will do that, Your Honor. This time I would move to admit State's Exhibit 78. Go there.
78 is admitted.
And State's Exhibit 88. You recognize what State's Exhibit 88 is.
State's Exhibit 88 was my laboratory designation. H is in Harvey. That was identified as one paint can containing sod smelling similar to gasoline.
Should what's been marked as State's Proposed Exhibit 79. Ask if you can identify what that is.
State's Exhibit 79, which was my laboratory designation, B as in boy, was identified as a sealed paper sac containing burned cloth.
Well, I'm going to admit State's Exhibit 79.
No objection, Your Honor.
79 is admitted.
Show you State's Exhibit 107.
I have State's Exhibit 107.
And you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
State's Exhibit 107 was my laboratory designation K as in Kelvin. It was listed as 1 gray plastic sack from the Hillside Inn.
This time I move to admit State's 107.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 107 is admitted.
Mr. Bush, to go through the analysis that you did, we talked about B, C, and D. Regarding State's Exhibit 80, which was your lab designation E, what were the results of that examination?
As far as our laboratory designation E as an elephant, or State's Exhibit 80, this consisted of 1 piece of partially melted polyethylene plastic was noted in this paint can debris. The piece of polyethylene was approximately 2 1/1000ths of an inch in thickness and was gray on one side and black on the other side.
Then regarding the examination of State's Exhibit State's Exhibit 84, your designation I.
Excuse me, I don't know that I received State's Exhibit 84. I received a State's Exhibit 88, but not 84, I believe.
To mark the State's Exhibit 84 for identification.
I can't identify this item?
You can?
Yes.
And what is State's Exhibit 84?
State's Exhibit 84 corresponds to my laboratory designation I, which was a paint can containing 1 plaid piece of cloth with gray plastic material smelling of gasoline.
This time I move to admit State's Exhibit 84.
No objection, Your Honor.
84 is admitted.
And then your examination of State's Exhibit 107, your lab designation K.
As far as, and I don't know that all I've done for State's Exhibit, first of all, State's Exhibit 84 is listed what it was. I have not testified as to results, but as far as State's Exhibit 107, which is my laboratory Exhibit K, again, which was identified as 1 gray plastic sack from the Hillside Inn, my results of that are as follows. The plastic polyethylene bag from Exhibit K, measured approximately 2 1/1000ths of an inch in thickness, was gray on the outside and black on the inside. elemental analysis showed titanium present in this bag, which was not present in either of the plastic pieces in exhibits E or I.
And thank you for pointing that out. Would you please, what was your result of your analysis of Exhibit 84?
As far as State's Exhibit 84 is concerned, which was my Exhibit I, a piece of partially melted polyethylene plastic was noted adhering to the plaid dress in Exhibit I. This piece of polyethylene plastic was approximately 2/1000ths of an inch in thickness and was gray on one side and black on the other side.
Mr. Bush, those last items we discussed, am I correct that what you were doing was comparing what appears to be a plastic bag in 107 with exhibits 80 and 84.
Yes, excuse me one moment.
We'll have to seal that a little better.
As far as what I was attempting to do here, I had State's Exhibits 80 and 84, which contain partially melted pieces of polyethylene plastic. What I was attempting to do was to determine whether or not if those two pieces of plastic, melted polyethylene plastic, listed as having originated from the body area of Jennifer Lewis, were they similar to the polyethylene plastic bag that was listed as coming from the Hillside Inn. As far as thickness and composition, they were similar. However, the plastic bag from the Hillside Inn, State's Exhibit 107, did have a difference from an elemental analysis that titanium was present in that bag from the Hillside Inn, that the other two pieces of plastic did not have titanium present in them.
In 2014, were these, not these, but some items resubmitted to the DCI laboratory for analysis?
Yes.
And did you have some involvement in that analysis?
Yes.
And what would your involvement have been?
My involvement in 2014 was to assist one of our DNA analysts with the assessment of a series of hairs that were submitted and or identified in this case to determine whether or not they were possibly worthy of doing DNA analysis on them.
And what did you find in your analysis?
In my analysis, again, I looked at a series of different exhibits that were previously submitted to me back in 1990 and tried to assess all those hairs microscopically to determine whether or not there, first of all, there was a root present on the end of that hair and whether or not root had a tissue tag on the end. Typically, if you pluck your hair, you're going to have a few skin cells adhering to the root end of your hair. And if there are skin cells present on the root end of that hair, they would be worthy of at least an attempt to do DNA analysis, because that's where you get your, if we're talking STR DNA analysis, which we do, that's where you would be able to develop the profile from the tissue tag or the skin cells that would be on the roots of those hairs. So what I did is went through all the evidence that was resubmitted to our laboratory and made assessments as to all those hairs in there that, first of all, that I determined were of Caucasian origin, and then made a determination as to whether or not I believed they were worthy to attempt DNA analysis. If I believed they were worthy to do DNA analysis on, I was then cutting them out and putting them in what's called a microcentrifuge tube for DNA analysis to be done at a later time.
And would that analysis have been done by somebody else?
Yes, that would have been done by one of our certified or qualified DNA analysts in the crime lab.
Did you find any hair samples that were suitable for DNA analysis?
There were a number of hairs that I believed could possibly be suitable for DNA analysis, so I did cut a number of hair roots off of these hairs from, again, back in 1990, and placed them in microcentrifuge tubes for one of our analysts to attempt to perform DNA analysis.
But that analysis was done by another person?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. I have no further questions.
You may cross-examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
A question about Exhibit 127 first. And I believe you have 127 in front of you, do you not?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So the first 2 pages would have your results, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the following 4 pages have basically the assignment of the agency number or letter in this case, correct?
That's correct. It has both our laboratory designation and the agency's designation of each of these items that were submitted in this case.
Okay, and so that basically acts as a key so that when you list B, C, and D with your results, we can refer to here to see the description of exhibits, what B, C, and D are.
That's correct. That would be down the left side of these pages where it says at the top of that column, laboratory designation.
And on the right-hand side is the agency designation. That would be the law enforcement department sent it to you with their designation.
That's correct. And then in this case, it would have been down to our police department.
And then the final few pages is just the receipt that we've seen before for the evidence. Is that right?
That's correct. That would be the evidence receipt form when the evidence was actually submitted to our laboratory.
Okay. If you could, to track, sir, if you look at the 3rd page of that exhibit, which is the first page of the description of the exhibit, there's E, your laboratory designation, correct?
Yes.
And it says paint can containing light-colored cloth from Lewis smelling like gasoline.
Correct.
And so is the polyethylene that you described in E in your analysis something that was removed from that cloth?
If I refer to my notes here said that the paint can with the light-colored cloth sampled also had gray plastic material that was melted and similar, well, that was also, yes, it was in that can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just didn't see the plastic bag or any reference to plastic there. That's why I was concerned. So the same is true with I then, that's the paint can that has cloth as well, but also some gray plastic.
That's correct.
And, okay, that cleared up some confusion for me. So, the ultimate results, I'll talk about the trash bag in a second, but everything we tested, and there are quite a few things. Hairs, you look at clothing, you were given sheets, you were given bed pillows, that sort of thing, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's not uncommon when you're doing the lab work for a sexual assault or even allegations of a homicide, that a lot of evidence is collected from areas that may potentially be the scene of the crime.
That's correct.
Did you receive any items to examine? In some places they designate the place that it came from, fair enough?
Correct.
Okay, so in other words, they refer to the plastic bag in K as coming from Hillside.
Correct.
Did you receive any sheets, bedspreads, gas cans, anything, physical evidence other than something specific like the hairs of Jennifer Lewis from an address at 1116 7th Avenue in Rock Island. If you refer to it in any other way, that's the residence of the Glens and Jennifer Lewis.
I see there's was an item S, as in Sam, it said photographs of tire tracks from 11th Street and 7th Avenue, Rock Island, Illinois. So I do not know specifically where that was at, but again, I did not examine those photographs. I do know there were items that were listed as having come from what was listed as the Hillside Inn, and I don't know if that's the same place or not.
Okay. All right, so as far as your rooms are concerned, you don't have anything that came from at least 7th Avenue. Physical evidence, I'm not talking about photographs of tires, I know what that's about, but physical evidence from, as far as akin to the other things that you examined from that residence.
Again, I do not know specifically where the items that I examined came from. I do know there were a series of items submitted from a Peugeot automobile, but besides that, I really don't know specifically where those other items came from, besides the ones that came off from the autopsy.
Understood. Fair enough. There was DNA analysis, or at least the idea of DNA markers back in 1990.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the first cases that used that in criminal court, and underlying court, that in well before 1990.
Several years before, yes.
It was known, correct?
Yes.
DNA analysis costs money.
DNA analysis is quite expensive.
And it's gotten cheaper, but I mean, there was one reason why the state stayed away.
That was one of the reasons we did not come online right away with DNA analysis in the late 80s was due to cost, yes.
Right, at least for Iowa.
Correct, for Iowa.
You can't speak to the lab status of Illinois, New York, California, or the federal government for that, okay?
Correct.
Okay. And how long were you at the department? When did you start at DCI Department of Justice?
I started at the DCI Crime Lab in 1982.
You didn't happen at all to work on a case involving an individual named James Clint, did you? K-L-I-N-E-T?
I was in the laboratory at the time. I did not do any analysis specific to that case.
As far as hair, you need live tissue or to do DNA analysis.
I wouldn't necessarily classify it as live tissue. What you do need is cellular material on the root end of a hair to do what's known as SDR DNA analysis, which is the methodology that we use in our laboratory. There are other techniques out there or methodologies that are available that can work on the shaft, but for our purposes, you need the root end with a tissue tag or some cellular material on the end.
And it's not unusual, but I understand it, you are the expert here now, okay? I understand it to be, there are some labs that will look at mitochondrial DNA, which is what you're looking at, and what I refer to as hair which is dead. Is that a good layperson's explanation of it?
What I would tell you is mitochondrial DNA analysis can actually be done on the shaft of the hair. So I could just take, say, a centimeter or a half a centimeter of the actual, just the shaft of the hair, and can do DNA mitochondrial analysis on that. However, the big difference here is that that testing is very, very expensive. It's typically over $3,000 per sample to run.
And I don't believe that your lab has the capability to obtain that.
That's correct. We do not have the capability of doing mitochondrial DNA analysis.
But is there a lab in Pennsylvania that does?
Yes, sir. There's a handful of labs in the country that can do mitochondrial DNA analysis.
And it wouldn't be unusual in a high-profile and extremely serious case where money kind of becomes no object to if hair analysis was deemed necessary or maybe important because we're coming up with nothing in the state land to send it to an out-of-state lab.
Yes, that's quite a reasonable request and can happen or does happen in cases.
And in fact, that the idea of genetic markers that existed back in the 90s, there was some testing capabilities for in different labs throughout the United States. You did have that capability to send it out, any sample you had to those labs.
But I would say there was, again, a different type of DNA analysis that was done back in the late 80s, early 90s. One was called restriction fragment length polymorphism, another known as D1SA, and another called dot loss that was kind of the precursor to what we're doing today. The RFLP that was really going on in about 1990 or so, about 87 through about 92, was a technique that was out there, very labor intensive, not very sensitive. You needed a lot bigger sample to do the DNA testing, that RFLP testing, than what we do today. It's probably like 100 or 1,000 times more sample than what we can test today.
Still testable if you have it.
Possible.
Do you know, did your agency take any steps to seek out any other labs across the country that might have a little better sophistication, at least not amongst the staff necessarily, but the equipment? Did they send it out to any place?
As far as I'm aware, in this case is concerned, no other requests were made for additional external DNA analysis at that time.
Now, let me go back to this. If you just wash an area that maybe had blood or something on it with water, in all likelihood there's going to be some material left that you can pick up DNA, correct?
I would say, again, if an item is just washed with water, it's possible you could still have DNA. Again, it just depends on the extent of that washing and then what happens to that, say, wet garment afterwards. Is it sitting there getting moldy, or is it drying out? Is it exposed to sunlight, which would damage DNA? Lots of variables involved here.
Without getting too delicate, let me talk about body cavities.
Excuse me?
Body cavities.
All right.
We did talk about heat as being one factor that can destroy.
We did talk about heat.
Heat, that can be one factor that may lead to the destruction of fluid where DNA or other testing can be done. But it is contained within the cavity, the vaginal cavity or the anal cavity. It's much more protected than obviously on the surface of the water, correct?
I would say yes. The sample was in the vaginal vault or the rectal cavity. You would expect that to be obviously more protected than the outer surface of those areas, yes.
And I know you didn't perform an autopsy or anything like that, but you would also expect that heat that would be responsible for destroying that trace of fluid to have some impact on the tissue within those cavities.
Again, I would expect that to happen. Again, I don't know what internal temperatures were there. If that body, well, it appears that body was on fire, or there was burning taking place on the skin or the outside. So again, I do not know the temperature, the internal temperature of those areas.
When you are doing the chemical analysis of plastics, so I'm talking about E&I, we figure out what they are now. And is one that, obviously you're testing for the existence of, it appears, titanium, is that correct?
That was one of the examinations I performed, looking at thickness, looking at color, obviously on both sides of the plastic, looking at, again, what I would call, was pyrolysis analysis, but basically identifying that it was polyethylene. And then lastly was elemental analysis to determine, again, if there were similarities between the two partially burned bags and then what I would call the known bag that was coming from the hillside.
And finding the presence of titanium and K, when we talk about E&I, the ones that were partially melted, that process of partially melting wouldn't remove titanium from their chemical makeup.
I would not expect that to happen. Titanium is an element, it would not just disappear.
It's not going to evaporate.
Correct.
Okay. And have you examined many plastic bags or garbage bags?
Again, a few, as a supervisor now, I'm no longer doing forensic analysis, but I did back in the 80s and 90s look at some bags. I did get information from one of the detectives from Davenport and had done some literature research about bags. And again, what I found is there's considerable variability in the production of when they came to plastic bags.
And actually, a lot of that's proprietary, correct?
That is correct. Some of these companies do not want to give me too much information again because most likely, again, it was probably proprietary, sorry.
I had that same trouble. But titanium, you have an understanding that titanium would be something that may be part of the makeup of a bag, just shrinking it.
That's possible. I don't know the specific purpose of the titanium there.
But knowing that the titanium would not get into the elemental setup of that but for the manufacturing process, correct?
Correct. I would expect that titanium dioxide was put in there as part of the manufacturing process.
There's really no other explanation for it being in plastic, is there?
I do not know any.
Okay. And the same holds true with E&I, the partially melted ones. The absence of titanium presumably would also have been a result of the manufacturing process.
Yes, that's correct.
Because it wouldn't have been removed by the change in its condition from the melt.
That's correct.
Because it wouldn't have been removed.
By the change of its condition because of melting.
And I would answer that correct.
And so it's safe to assume, and I know that you're not from the companies that manufacture those, but just based on those assumptions, the plastic bag material found in E&I is not the same as found in K.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. As he prefaced his question with, he is not privy to the manufacturing process, and I don't believe he's qualified to answer that particular question.
If he feels he can qualify, he's qualified, he can go ahead and answer it. If not, he should state that.
I do not know about the manufacturing process of garbage bags or plastic bags, but what I can tell, again, from my report is that item K, the known reference sample from the Hillside Inn, did have the presence of titanium in it, and the other two did not. I don't know if that is significant or not. I do not know.
So that's the only thing you say is that K was different elementally than I and E.
Correct. K had the presence of titanium in it. E and I did not have titanium in it, or in them, I should say.
You also looked at floor mats, Q, is your number?
Yes,
That you believe were from the Peugeot and found that thing of interest, is that right?
that's correct.
And AR, which was a sealed paper package containing the backseat bench from the Peugeot, correct?
That is correct.
And you recovered several hairs from back there, that none of them were similar to Mr. Woods, is that right?
That's correct.
Finally, Exhibit 120, the second page, sir, the receipt, there's a special request on there. It says Ford's FBI lab after analysis. Do you know why that was the case?
Excuse me, I need to remember what it states Exhibit 120 was.
If I can approach it and show you mine.
Yes, go ahead.
So you see that handwritten request there for the FBI?
Yes, I do see that.
And actually, sorry, that's not accurate for JFK lab after analysis, is that right?
I believe that's what it said. I'm sorry. I just took it from his back.
He's already in. And do you know why it was reported to the FBI lab?
I do not recall.
Okay, do you know what it was?
I do not recall.
Do you know how many pieces total of evidence from this investigation that you analyzed?
There's dozens of items of evidence. As far as actually the pieces themselves, as far as hairs and fibers, it would have been in the thousands of specific pieces that I looked at in this case. We're talking about looking at all the hairs and all the fibers that I looked at.
Excuse me, redirect.
Yes, just a couple of questions, Your Honor. Regarding Exhibit 127, Mr. Bush, and the part of the report that begins on the third page, your description of exhibits. And Mr. Hallbaker pointed out item E, a paint can containing light-colored cloth from Lewis smelling like gasoline, and I believe I, paint can containing one flat piece of cloth with gray plastic smelling of gasoline. Those descriptions come from in this case, the Danforth Police Department.
That's correct. That we're just basically tightening up what the Davenport Police Department had listed when they submitted the evidence to our laboratory.
And while I'm sure your laboratory assists agencies with investigations, primarily it's up to the agency as far as executing the crime scene, collecting evidence. It's the agency that decides what to collect, collects it, and then they send it to you for analysis.
That's correct. The agencies are the ones that determine what they want to examine and to what area or discipline of the laboratory they want the examinations to be done.
And if you recall, and I can get them, but if you recall regarding E and I, those two items that had light-colored, well, in the case of E, light-colored cloth, and I, plaid piece of cloth, and then there was also plastic in there. Am I correct that the plastic was kind of melted and combined with the cloth as one piece, sort of?
That's correct. They were kind of all stuck together due to the melting process. Probably the heat caused that.
So it wasn't just kind of a random piece of plastic in with a random piece of cloth?
No.
They were together. Now, I want to talk about Statistic 120 and the examination of the sex kit. And we've covered already that there was no seminal fluid detected.
That's correct.
And it wouldn't matter what has changed in DNA analysis from 1990 to now, there still was nothing collected from Jennifer that could be examined for DNA.
I am not aware of any items from, I would guess, the autopsy of Jennifer Ann Lewis that would be worthy of doing DNA analysis at this time. But whenever you attempt DNA analysis, we want to try and, obviously it has to be associated to something. So typically, we're trying to associate it to a biological fluid, such as seminal fluid, saliva, blood, urine, or again, if there's tissue there, that again, you could use to try and associate those forensic samples back to a specific person. I did not detect any biological fluids on the sexual assault kit of Jennifer Ann Lewis, so in my opinion, I don't know that there was any biological material there that could be used for an attempt for DNA analysis. I'm not saying that we can't attempt it, but I did not find anything from my test back in 1990.
So there would be nothing to send to a lab in Pennsylvania or anywhere because nothing was recovered.
As far as the sexual assault kit is concerned, I did not see any evidence in there worthy of doing DNA analysis on.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Can you recross?
But out of the thousands of pieces of evidence or items you looked at, there were some that were ultimately tested for DNA, just not related to the sex of these kids.
That's correct.
Sexual assault kit. Okay, and of all the tests that you've done, there's no conclusion or any result. There's a finding of Mr. Liggins' hair, Mr. Liggins' DNA related to this crime.
Yes, I cannot testify about the DNA analysis that was done by another analyst, so I have actually not even read that report. But as far as my examination of hairs and fibers in this case from back in 1990, I did not find any specific items of evidence that I could associate back to Mr. Stanley Liggins. And again, what I was looking for was possibly hairs from Jennifer Ann Lewis or fibers that would have come from her dress that could have been associated back to the crime scene, back to, say, that Peugeot vehicle or that hillside. And that's what I was attempting to do, was look for pieces of evidence that we could associate Jennifer Ann Lewis back to either a vehicle or to a residence or apartment. I don't know what it was, actually.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you, sir. You can sit down. Anything else for the jury today?
I don't believe so, Your Honor, not in this state.
Not much on it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our break. And I want to tell you about next week's schedule so you know what to expect. Obviously, Monday is a holiday, and we're going to have to work on Monday. So we will not have trial on Monday. We will have trial Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I wish we could be here Friday, but my daughter's getting married Saturday, so I am taking Friday off. So we will not have trial on Friday. So next week our trial will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from about 9 to 4:30 every day. I understand that will not put us any further behind and still should keep us within our time frame. So I appreciate your patience for that. Continue to keep an open mind. Do not discuss the case, and we'll see you 9 o'clock Tuesday. Please rise. See you Tuesday.
Serological.